everyone, welcome back to our next session. We are going to go through embroidering the centerpiece of our quilt block for our drawstring bag. I'm going to go through the process of hooping your fabric in your stabilizer, going to the computer and sending your design to the embroidery machine, and then the entire process of stitching it out. So join me on this next step. So I already have my fabric pre-cut and my stabilizer. So I'm going to take these two pieces and we're going to go through putting it in the hoop and securing it in there. I like to use a couple different types of stabilizer when I'm doing embroidery. Today we're using quilted cotton, so you could use a tearaway if you wanted to, because it is not a knit fabric that stretches, so that stabilizer can go away. But for this one, I'm going to be using a cutaway. I just want more stability for the design that I'm going to be using, and it's just going to give it a cleaner finished look. The stabilizer doesn't matter for this bag, it can stay in there. So we're just going to be using a cutaway for this one today. So I have my fabric on top of my stabilizer here, and I'm going to lay my hoop flat. You want to make sure when you're hooping that you're doing it on a flat surface, not on your lap or places like that, a flat surface. So I've got my stabilizer down and my fabric, and I've just sort of eyeball centered it in my hoop here. Then I'm going to take my next piece, and if you notice, sometimes there are markings on hoops that you want to make sure you get lined up. On this one, there are arrows. You want to make sure those arrows are going to be touching when you hoop it together. So it's not going to be like this or like this. You want to make sure you have your hoop secured the correct way. You also want to loosen your screw over here so that this center piece can fit in there. So I've got my fabric and everything there. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to push this back piece down, and I'm going to hold that in place. Then I'm going to smooth my fabric out. And as I do that, I'm going to push the other side in just like that. And you'll notice I've got a smooth surface to work on here. I don't have any bubbles. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten the embroidery screw right there. And then I learned this little tip. If you just push just a little bit of that inner hoop into the back, you'll have just like a 1/16 of a millimeter overhang. That way when it's embroidering, it's got this smooth surface of your stabilizer to move on, but it also sets your fabric and your stabilizer in and gives you a little bit more of a tight area to work within. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our design and we're going to send it to our machine. I was able to get a monogram design from the Classic Sewing team from their website. You can find it there, but you can use any monogram you would like. You're going to want a monogram that will fit within the square for our quilt block, which finished is a 4x4, but you'll notice I didn't pre-cut my fabric. When you're doing an embroider block and then you cut it down to size, you want to have more space than what you need because there will be a little bit of shrinkage with the embroidery. That way you can cut it down to size. If I were to cut it at a 4.5 by 4.5 beforehand, it may shrink down a little bit more to about a 4.25 by 4.25. So I have a full hooping here with my stabilizer that I'm going to cut down once my monogram's done. So I have my monogram already loaded in the software over here, and I'm going to come up to File, and we're going to send it to the machine. My machine is already recognized over here. What's great is that the Singer 9180 is going to be a Wi-Fi enabled machine that you can send your designs directly from the software to the machine without any cords or USBs. It's a great feature that I love, that I'm very spoiled with when I say that. So we're going to send it directly over here. We're going to go to File and Send to our machine. And my machine is already selected. We're going to hit Send. And there it is. And if we come over to the machine, you will see that our design is there and ready to go. So you can tell I already have my embroidery foot loaded on my machine. I have embroidery bobbin thread in the bottom, and then I have embroidery thread at the top as well. You're going to want to use a rayon thread or any type of embroidery thread in that way in the top and the bottom. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to load my hoop. You're going to notice this little this is where it's going to attach right here on the embroidery arm. I'm going to stabilize that so I don't push it out of alignment because my machine has already calibrated this embroidery arm. I'm going to stabilize it here, and I'm going to push my hoop in until it clicks. And then we know it's securely in place. Then what we're going to do, we're going to come over to the machine screen now, and we're going to send this design to the embroidery mode. There's a design mode and embroidery mode. So up here, we're going to click this button, and right down here, you're going to see a green check mark, and that's going to send it into embroidery mode. And it calibrated it there. And then what we're going to do, I already have my machine threaded and ready to go. We're going to hit start. Oh, it wants me to lower my foot. I love that little feature. It reminds me it's not going to start embroidering without that. There it goes. You'll notice that every time it changes colors, you're going to be prompted to change the color. It's going to stop embroidering and give you an opportunity to add in any color that you would like. So now we're on to our last step, and we're going to hit play. And now our design is done. We're going to pull it out of the embroidery arm. And look, we have a beautifully embroidered monogram to go in the center of our quilt block. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to cut it down to size to what we need for our quilt block and start constructing it. Now that we have our embroidered block finished, we are going to take it and we are going to cut it down to a 4.5 by 4.5 inch square for the center of our quilt block that we're making. I already have one cut down here for us, so right there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start constructing our quilt block together. So the first thing we're going to do is like this top part up here, our flying geese. So when we cut our pieces out on Memento, it drew our sewing lines, our 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it also drew our sew line for when we do that angle for the flying geese. So that's what we're gonna do next. So if you look at my pieces here, I have one on top of the other like this, and this is gonna be my sew line. I'm gonna sew it down at a diagonal towards the middle right here. So we're gonna put this under here, and I'm gonna put on a 1/4 inch piecing foot because when you're quilting, you want to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've got that foot here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to guide my fabric along the edge of the foot here. So we're going to snap that on, and I just have a white cotton thread in the top and in the bobbin now. I no longer have the embroidery thread in. So what we're going to do here is we are going to line up our sew line, that diagonal line that we had. We're going to line that up with the opening here, but I'm actually going to move it just a thread, a hair to the left. I kind of want to sew to the right of that line just a little bit. It's going to make it a little bit easier when it comes to cutting this and then pressing it open when we get to that point. So let's sew these down here. So I have it really just a hair to the left of the needle, that line there. And I'm going to sew all the way down. And I can stop with my needle in the down position there. And then I can get my next two pieces and continue sewing there. You can just chain piece them together. I've got my right sides together, and I'm going to line up to get that angle again. And I like to do all 4 of these at once, because then what I can do is I can cut them down and press all at once and then come back around and do the next one. So let's do these last 2 here. I like to raise it up just a little bit to get that point of my quilt block up under there so it doesn't get caught. Just right along there from point to point. And one more. Like that. I learned this little trick from one of my quilting buddies. Well, you'll see when we cut off the seam allowance there, and when we open it up, it just gives you a good clean finish there. And there is a thread cutter on the machine, so I use that to cut that last one. I'm going to break these 4 apart here because I've chain pieced them. I've got one long little tail. And then I'm going to take them over here to my cutter, and we are going to line up a 1/4 inch off of that seam that we just sewed right there. And we're going to cut that just like that. So we'll have 4 pieces just like this. And I like to save these little triangles. I'm not sure what I would ever do with them, but I feel like we can put them back together and make like a little mini quilt or something to go along with it. So once we get these 4 cut, we're gonna press them open. So I'm gonna move my mat out of the way. And we have something new to go along with our Memento line. We have the Singer Memento mini press. So this is great for when you're doing monogram with heat press vinyl and things like that, but it's also great for these little pieces, just pressing them open. So you can, what I really enjoy about it is you can do it in 10 degree increments, so all the way up to 400 degrees. And it's just a great little iron to get those little seams when you're quilting cut just like that, those crisp seams. And when we were cutting on the Memento, we used a fabric pen to draw our lines that you see on here, so that whenever we have a heat, I guess a heat away pen, and then we have a water soluble pen. So whenever you take your pieces, whenever you put the iron to them, all of those lines will disappear so you don't see them. So just like that. So I have 4 half of my flying geese right now. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our next 4 pieces and we're gonna line them up. This is where you have to be mindful of the diagonal that you're doing. So you don't wanna have this diagonal here where they go from side to side right here. We want them to go point to point like that. So point up here at the top is where we're gonna start sewing down to the corner over here. So we're gonna line all of those up. And again, I'm gonna line it up just a hair. The line that I'm sewing is just a hair to the right of the line that the Memento drew for me. So again, point to point there. So if you're new to quilting and you're not as accurate with your cutting and getting your seam allowances just right, the Memento cutter made it super easy to be able to just sew those good clean lines and get the correct seam allowance that you need for all of your projects. It took the thought out of it for me. I don't have to necessarily worry about my seam allowance. I can sew on those lines or right to the side of them like we're doing for this. So once you get all 4 of those done, we're going to cut again, raise that up, and we're going to do the same thing, the same process. We're going to trim these down and then press them open. So same thing here. We're going to cut these 1/4 inch from our seam that we sewed. Wrong one. There we go. And one more. So just like that. And then we're going to press these open. You'll notice right like there, I've got a good flying geese block. And I like having this little iron here to do my pressing with my seams open versus a big bulky one. It just, with these little pieces, I don't have to worry about the big iron and burning myself as I go. So once you're done, you'll have 4 of these flying geese right here. And these are what's gonna go all around our quilt block that we're gonna sew together next. So next, what we're gonna add to them is we are going to take our 4 squares. We had 4 of our floral squares. These are going to be on our points, our little cornerstones. So we're only going to sew them to 2 of them first, and then you'll see we're going to put 2 of them on each end of it. So one right here, and then we're going to do another one at the other end. So one at the top, one at the bottom. And I just do 2 of them at a time here. And again, this time I'm going to sew directly on that sew line that the Memento drew for me, because I know that's a 1/4 inch off of the edge of the material. So let's try that again there. Right So we're going to sew a 1/4 inch all the way down. Just like that. And then one more. So we're only going to do this with 2 of our flying geese pieces. Get that out of the way a little bit. Just like that. And I like to press these open now just to get them out of the way. So we are going to press them this way. I like to, again, this is really a preference. When we get to the bigger block, you're going to see that it could have gone either way. In my opinion, and this is my opinion, anybody, you can do it any way you would like. I like to press towards the darker fabric. So I'm going to press my seam towards this floral piece here. So that's going to press them outward, out that way. But when we get to doing our bigger block, you're going to see where I was kind of conflicted with which way I should go. Because when we get to our bigger block, we're going to press them inwards, and then it's on the white fabric, and it's just one of those internal battles that I had with myself. Which way should I press these? So I know sometimes they say you should press it towards the darker so that you don't see them. So it's really just, it's not a rule, it's a suggestion normally. So what I'm doing now is I'm sewing one more block to the other end of our flying geese piece. Maybe I should call it a flying goose piece, not a geese, because it's just one piece. So get this lined up here. And again, I can eyeball and do my seam along my foot, or because I have that line drawn from Memento, I can just sew directly on the line that I already had cut there. So we're going to press this again back towards the floral, and I like to have them so that the piece that I am pressing up is on top, and you'll see the difference in that. So if I wanted it to press towards the inside of my flying geese, I would have that piece up, and then I would open it up that way to press it. So just like that. So I've got my piece that I want it to press towards up on top. I'm going to open it like that. There we go. So there are 2 of our side pieces we have ready to go. So these are going to go on the outside of our quilt block that we already have. But we can't sew these to this yet because we're missing something at the top and bottom. So we're going to take those other 2 flying geese pieces and we're going to sew them to the top and the bottom, or the left and the right. It's completely your preference because we'll sew the other 2 pieces along it. But what you want to be mindful of is what direction you're sewing them in. So there's a couple different ways you could do it. You could have it this way to where the pieces are outward, but that's not the look sort of that we're going with. You could have it go, let me show you what that would look like this. This is another type of block you could have it go, but we're going to have it go this way. So you just want to be mindful of which way you are sewing these 2 pieces on like that. So we're going to do one of these first here. And what I like to do also is I like to line up my pieces right here. And then what I will do is I will put a pin right in where those 2 seams meet on my flying geese piece right there, because I know that I need to sew right along there so that when I open it up, it opens up and you have the right distance, the good point, things like that there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to line this up. And since we've pressed and we had a heat away pen that we had used, our lines are no longer there, which it's okay. We can still make it work because we have our presser foot and we can just guide our fabric along the edge of that presser foot. So we're going to line this up here and we're going to sew down. And I like to make sure, I want to stop with my needle in the down position. I want to make sure that my seams have not, have not folded up like this, that they're laying down flat if I'm going towards them. And then once I get to that center seam, I'm just going to go a little bit slower. And once I get closer, I'm going to pull my needle out. And I want my stitch to go right there in that point seam that we had. Sometimes when you have a bulkier seam like that, your quilt block will want to shift on you. So you are in control of your fabric. You want to make sure that it's staying in place just like that. So if you look here, my point is right along there, right where we need it. And it's not too far in, it's not too far out where I see more of that yellow. It is right there. And then what I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Again, being mindful of which way my fabric is laying so that when it's all said and done, they all point the same way as well. So let's line this up. And again, if you feel like it, you could pin them in place to hold that center seam where you're going to sew so that it doesn't shift on you. And so let me show this again. You want to make sure that this seam is not coming up right here when you're sewing. You want to make sure that it goes underneath the feet and stays flat. So right along that edge there. And then you just make sure everything's lined up and you continue going. So just like that. There we go. And now we have about half of our block is finished. And we're going to sew these two pieces to the entire piece now. So I want to first press these open and outward. So this is where I had that internal conflict of which way I should go. If we want to line these pieces up with this so that when the seams match, you want the seams to go in opposite directions. So what I mentioned, you want your seam to go towards your dark fabric so that it doesn't show on the light side. But with this one, we need to press it the other way so that it lines up, it sandwiches together right. So we are going to press this towards the inside of the block. So remember I mentioned when you're doing this, we want to have the piece that we want the seam to go towards up. So I've got my center block up here, and we're going to open it here this way so that our seam folds towards the center there, just like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same to the other side over here. We want our quilt block piece to be up, and we're going to open it this way. Let's see if I can get it shifting on me there. So just like that, press that down that way. And then this is where it makes it a little bit easier to sew these blocks or these two pieces together, because your seams, they go in opposite directions and they sort of puzzle piece sandwich in together really well. So you'll notice here that this bottom one goes this way, this top one goes the other way. And I'm gonna just feel that and make sure that those two edges are lining up together. And then I'm gonna take a pin to hold that in place, because I like to think I'm not a beginner, but I'm an intermediate quilter. But when I start sewing, they're gonna shift a little bit. So I like to make sure most of my seams that I know need to meet are lined up and pinned together so that I don't have any of that shifting. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew along this entire top seam here. So again, we're gonna go with the edge of our presser foot here to get our 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you're quilting, you want that 1/4 inch seam. And again, making sure that our seam that's pressed towards is not coming up and out of the way. And then when we get, again, to this little point, our flying geese point, we want to make sure that the needle is going to go down right there in that, where the point meets up there, right there. We're going to keep going. All the way down. All right, now that we have sewn our first piece on, before we press this, we're gonna sew the next one on, because I'm gonna show you my little trick for twisting them to get your seams to lay all directionally appropriate. So we're gonna take the next one, and again, what I did was I lined up those two seams right there, so they sort of sandwich into each other. You can feel if they're overlapped, it feels a little bit bulkier, and you can feel if there's a space, you can feel that opening there. So you really just wanna make sure that they line up really well together. And I will pin through the back one that's pressed this way first, and then I make sure I come back in to the front one. So I'm pinning and holding both of them in the same spot. And we're gonna do the same thing on the other side, making sure they're sandwiched together. And I pin through the right seam or the right seam allowance and then come back up through the left. So you see how they're sort of angled. It just holds both of them in place so that you can make sure that they're gonna stay in place as you come up to them. So we're gonna line this back up into our last seam, and then we'll be almost done with our quilt block. And I will, before I get to my pin, because we don't sew over pins, I like to stop and I like to sew till I can get pretty close to it, and then I will pull that pin out and then I will continue sewing. Making sure again that I'm gonna sew right into that middle seam. So I like to slow down a little bit when I get there. And if I need to just adjust it a little bit, I will, right there, and then I will keep going. And we're gonna pull this guy out. Make sure we're finished lining up here. There we go. So we're gonna take this out, and now what we're gonna do is we're gonna press these seams open. But what I like to do is I don't want them all, you could have them all go one way, but I'm gonna actually have them twist because they naturally will twist open the right way. So I like to take those little corner pieces, and what I will do is I will take my seam ripper and just take out 1 or 2 stitches where they meet right along there, so that when I twist that, it opens up and it gives us a little pinwheel right there. And so I'm gonna do that for all of them. Sometimes they will just flip open for you a little bit easier, like this one. And then sometimes you just gotta find where that seam is and press it open, or cut it so that it'll flip open for you. Like that. Get one more here. Come on, okay. And then I'm gonna do it to the other ones on the other side as well. So I will sort of open it up a little bit, cut 1 or 2 of those seams, and you'll see that when you try and twist it, it'll just twist open and you get this little pinwheel looking effect. And then that way the seams are all going in different directions. Let's see if I can get it here. Let's find it. There it is. Sometimes you have to dig in there a little bit to find them. Like that. Okay. So I wanted to show you also those seams. When you have those 2 pieces sandwiches together, it makes it so much easier to have those clean points of your seams that line up really well, like right in there. You don't have that gap. You've got a good meet with your corner pieces there. So that's just my little trick for getting those to line up well. So now that I've got those 4 little corner seams open just a little bit, if you see here, now that opens up flat really easy. And then I can press that. So right here, I've got these little guys that open up, and then I will press whichever way they open is the way that you press the seams. And usually there's only one seam that will go a different direction. So these are already going the way that they were pressed originally. It's this one here that we're now gonna press down. So, and I like to just sort of press. When I say press, I'm not saying iron. I'm gonna just hold it down there. I'm not gonna rub back and forth because that will make your seams shift on you a little bit. So we're just gonna press and sort of hold that there just a little bit and make sure we're good. And we're gonna go all the way around to get all 4 corners there. Just like that. And one more. So just like that. There we go. And now we have our finished block. So, but there's one more thing we need to add to it to give it just, I wanted it to be a little bit bigger when I was making it. I didn't want it to be a super small bag. So I added 1 more border onto it, an inch border. So what you're gonna do, you had those long pieces that were cut as well. There is 2 10.5 inch pieces and 2 8.5 inch pieces. We're going to sew the 8.5 first. So it doesn't matter if you do them on the top or the bottom or the left or the right, it's completely up to you. But we're gonna sew them along the side just like that, right sides together. And since we haven't ironed these yet or pressed these, they have our sew lines on them. So you can get back on track and get everything lined up well, and you can sew right along that seam that you had. One other thing I want to mention is those seams for the underside of our quilt block, you want to make sure that whatever way they are going that you pressed, that they stay that way. Sometimes what'll help, and if you're new at sewing, I will pin that so that I know it goes which direction it's going, so that when I get to it, I can make sure that it is flowing the right way, because I did all that work to press these down. I don't want to sew and then have it go the wrong way now. So we're gonna line this up here, And we're going to sew all the way down our seam. And again, we're going to get up to our needle and we're going to pull that out because we don't sew over needles. And I made sure that my seam was pressed in the direction that it was going. And then when you get to the end, I sort of just make sure that my points line up and that my fabric hasn't shifted along the edge. I also will use those pins that I've put into the fabric as like a guide to remind me to realign my fabric. It gives me like a little halfway point of, hey, I need to make sure that my seams are lining up, my edges of my fabric are lining up and they haven't shifted. So it's just a good reminder in that way. We are going to press these open towards the green. I just found that it's just a little bit easier to do it that way. But again, whichever way the block naturally wants to open up is what I do. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other side. I like to line them up first, make sure my edges meet, and then I will pin that seam in the direction that it's supposed to go. And this is a good opportunity also for me to make sure that my edges are lined up as I go along so that I know that my seam is going to be the same all the way down. It's just like that. Got to this one, make sure it's going the right way. I could feel that it didn't feel right, so I'm gonna just look at that, line it up, and make sure we're still going in the right direction. Like that. And then we are gonna press that one open as well. And I like to do them the same way that I did the other one. I want to keep that consistency. So there we have this piece now, and now we're gonna add our border to the top and the bottom. Another way you could do this if you wanted to take your quilt blocks to another level, you could even add in, so like these are little cornerstones. I wouldn't call them a cornerstone on a block, but what you could do is you could add in little 1-inch blocks here so that these corner pieces were a different material as well. So it would just take it to another level and make it a more, I don't want to say advanced block, but just give you something, a different way to change it up. So for this one, I'm just going through and making sure all of my, wherever I have a seam, I'm most likely going to put a pin. It's just my good reminder of that seam is there. I need to make sure it's good to go. And then lining it up all the way down. And this is a good way of making sure that your piece is also long enough to go across your entire block. You want to make sure you've got a long enough piece. With the quilt block that I made, I knew what size it was going to be, so it should meet up to that roughly once you've sewn everything together. Keep going. All the way and cut. And same thing, we can just press this one towards the green. Can I tell you also, whenever you're making quilt blocks, try and avoid, use my experience, avoid things with straight lines, because if it's not straight on here, you're gonna wanna fix it if you're like me. So I had a little bit of a waste of fabric just to make sure when I was cutting my pieces, or when I cut the piece for the memento to cut it, that my lines were straight, because I didn't want them to come out looking wonky on my quilt block. So I try and avoid lines, but then sometimes I forget. I like the look of gingham, so I sometimes still use it and make it work. There's another print on the blue bag, the other one I'm going to show you here in a minute, another option if you don't have an embroidery machine. I'm going to show you another fabric that sort of is lined, but it's diagonal, so it hides it a little bit more and it's a little bit more forgiving versus the straight lines. So I'm going to put this under here. My bottom piece is getting caught up on me. There we go. And we're going to go all the way down for our last piece. All right. Coming to the end. And there we go. Let's press this one open real quick. And then we will have our finished quilt block front of our bag. And that wasn't too difficult at all for those new people that haven't quilted before or anything like that. Super simple and super easy. So I hope you join me for our next session where we are going to construct the entire bag together. I'm going to show you a fun little trick that I learned for doing one continuous piece to make the bag go together. I'm really excited to show you about it. So we'll see you next time.